Welcome to episode 5 of the Helpful Huddle podcast. I am your host, Luke, and today I got the opportunity to sit down with a good friend of mine, Scott Dodd, who is an athletic performance coach in Indiana now. And I've gotten the opportunity to know him over the past 5 or so years. He's an awesome guy. He has so much knowledge and specifically around athletic performance in the high school age and throughout all seasons of your sport. He does specifically focus on baseball currently, but the dude just knows how to make you a better athlete. Please enjoy this episode as I dig deep into how he helps others and ultimately what he is doing and his why. Welcome back to the Helpful Huddle podcast, episode 5. I am your host, Luke, and I'm sitting here with a good friend of mine, Scott. Say hi to the people, Scott.
How we doing, everybody?
Man, Scott, I have been looking forward to this interview for a long time now, ever since you and I sat down, what was about a year ago, and we talked about Olympic lifting, athletic performance.
Yeah, I think it was about this time, maybe April-ish.
Yeah,
So we're looking at about a year.
yeah. So I am looking forward to this. I want to quickly introduce because our the story of how we met was not very long. Um,
Mhm.
we were both working for a company called Lifetime in their leadership departments for personal training, and I think we just met at a I don't even know what they called it.
Yeah, it was the like the manager assistant manager conference because I remember
Yeah,
Myrna was my manager for probably 2 or 3 months when we had that like
uh-huh,
opening, and then right
that's
before
right.
you guys opened up Greenway. So
Yeah,
being prepared for that, Greenway was still in like the grand opening stages, and then we had that
hmm,
conference in downtown Houston.
that's right. That is right. And then yeah, then we grand open. But I also remember you and I kind of, or at least on my end, just kind of hitting it off immediately. We had very similar backgrounds, especially from an athletic performance standpoint,
Yep.
and then very similar I ideas and philosophies as it came to training.
The and you
And
knew
then
Mitch too. You grew
yeah,
up.
I knew Mitch. Yeah, I remember Mitch from high school before he got huge and strong as hell.
Yeah, so Mitch is actually a pretty big influence in how I train too, because like I had a pretty good understanding of like the conjugate system and how to go after like powerlifting and train in that aspect. But getting to spend some time with him, like we really took a deep dive into like the styles of Louis Simmons and
Hmm.
um, Matt Winning is a big influence of his, and there's one other guy, Chris Duffin, and how he kind of utilizes RP versus like a conjugate style. And so we kind of toyed and tested with a lot of stuff. So Mitch was definitely a really big influence in what I did, and like his background at Alabama too, working under Coach Jones is nothing to sneeze at
Hmm.
either.
No, for sure. And being a giant Alabama fan, I totally agree.
Yeah,
Um, but what I want to do now is kind of hop into kind of your story, starting out broad and hearing I mean, your story, your journey, how you got to this point, how did childhood help you get to this point?
yeah,
Take it away.
yeah, awesome. So I think big thing like most people, like I grew up in sports. My dad played baseball in college. Uncle played baseball in college. My brother played baseball in college, and so I knew that that's what I wanted to do too. I think I picked up a ball for the first time when I was 4 years old and fell in love with it. Had the opportunity to get a scholarship. Um, Had a pretty good like high school career, and honestly, I was an average college player. And I will be the first person to admit that I was really good in high school. I was okay at best in college. And so for me, it was where do I add value to this group? And a lot of the time, it ended up being in the weight room. Like I was pushing guys to move more weight, to take the extra reps, to get in when they didn't want to go, to make sure that we're getting up in time and getting to practice, and all of those things. So I I found out early on, probably my sophomore year of college. I was like, I know what direction I want to go because I'm already doing it currently. And at that time, I had this was actually kind of funny. Um, During the summers, I was on the back of a garbage truck in college. And so after 2 summers of doing that, I was like, do I want to do this again? Probably not. How much does it cost to get a certification? That sounds better. So I got a certification, started working at an LA Fitness. That's actually where I met Adam Jacobson, who I went down to Texas with.
Got it.
So Adam gives me my first job. I try to figure out, do I still want to play baseball? And I fell in love with personal training. So once I kind of figured out where my heart was, I stepped away from baseball, got into the personal training, finished up my degree, and then maybe a month before I graduated from college, I made the transition to Lifetime. So Lifetime gave me a bunch of opportunities, which is really cool. I got the USAW cert and precision nutrition through them. Got to have some really cool experiences at some of those certifications, and then obviously move across the country a couple times. So head down
Yeah.
to Houston, meet some really cool people down in Houston. Um, I ended up going out to Colorado for 3 years. So I transferred to
Yeah.
the Westminster Club out there. Once COVID hit, I kind of took a step away from training because nobody could really do it at the time. Ended up
Mhm.
working with Rep Fitness, which is what got me into a position at the sports stable up in Superior, Colorado. So that was my first actual position of being in sports performance. Started out doing catching stuff and some hitting lessons, and then finally one day, the head strength and conditioning coordinator for the baseball side looks at my Instagram and she goes, "Are you sure you're a baseball coach?" And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "All of your content is about squatting and deadlifting and like strength and conditioning stuff." She goes, "Do you want to do that here?" I go, "Yeah, nobody's asked me to do it. I would love to be a part of the strength and conditioning." Um, and then once I came home, I found Pro X, which is where I'm currently at. So now we work with mostly baseball and softball players. I do have a few other athletes that are like volleyball, wrestling, soccer. But the biggest demographic that I work with now is mostly baseball and softball.
I love it, and I mean, your whole story hits home for me, and it's
Mhm.
something I was thinking. I mean, I would say on a baseball performance standpoint, a I was a good high school player, and then I quickly became a average at best college player that could never stay healthy. I got in when we were either up by 20 or down by 20 and some mop
Mhm.
up duty. So, but I mean, I know you were better than that. You also stayed healthier than I did,
Mhm.
which is a testament to how you trained and how you took care of your body. I personally worked out with the baseball team 4 days a week in the morning and then would go do a bodybuilding style workout in the
Yeah.
afternoon and never recover and got super tight and just not good for the athletic performance side. And
Yeah.
but that's neither here nor there. But what I love your story as far as like it sounds like I don't know if you had a aha moment,
Mhm.
but you at least had a aha experience being in the personal training realm. What was that like?
It was really cool. So again, like most of the guys in on their like the college team, right? Like
Mhm.
I I figured out where my influence was going to be, and it was going to be pushing them there. And so when I first got to Indiana Wesleyan, I was thinking that I was going to go physical therapy, and then I shadowed my aunt. Noticed that she was just working with the older population. I was like, that is not where I want to go. I want to work with
Yeah.
athletes who are going to return to sport. That's where my heart kind of was. So I was like, well, if I can't fix them after they get hurt, what if I just prevent them from getting hurt? And like now I can kind of kill two birds with one stone. Don't have to worry about the repairs or anything like that. So now my biggest thing is I try to essentially just be the precaution or the person that's preventing these injuries from happening. How can I make sure that your body is physically prepared for the demand that you're going to be going through? And I think there's a lot of people who like okay, I need to go work out. And so they're 14, 15 years old, they tell their dad like, "Hey, I need to get stronger. What should we do?" And dad's first thought is, "Let's go to the gym together." And then they end up doing dad's bodybuilding style workouts or the workouts that dad did when he was in high school that are completely outdated nowadays. And then
Mhm.
you see injury happen because kids get strong pecs, strong quads, but they don't train their backside. And then they go to school and they sit in a chair for 8 hours a day. And so now they're like constantly hunched over, they're shortening their chest again. And now when I go try to throw a ball as hard as I can, well, my pec minor is super tight, my bicep tendon's super tight. I have no decelerators on my backside. That's just a recipe for disaster. And so when I talk to
Mhm.
kids, it's like, okay, the front side's gas, which is awesome, but the backside is your brakes. So like a Ferrari is really cool, but if it can't stop, you're going to crash. And for
Yep,
us, crash is injury. And then injury has you sitting out anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. So how can we make sure that that doesn't happen?
for sure. And I think what you're talking about right now kind of perfectly leads into my next question I wanted to get into it with you with is like you're an athletic performance trainer or whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it. The kind of the things that you offer that are different or special than what you're going to get from, I mean, for lack of a better phrase, like an LA fitness trainer
Yeah.
the foot or the football coach that just happens to be the biggest guy on the staff
Yeah.
that's training everybody in high school. what are those philosophies and those differences that someone like you can provide a high school college athlete?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it too is who I surround myself with. So like when I was up at the stable, like I have a pretty good understanding of the shoulder, right? Like I will be the first to say like I'm not the smartest strength coach on the planet. I'm well aware of that. I'm not the
Mhm.
best strength coach on the planet. I'm well aware of that. But I have a really good job of being able to take the knowledge that I have and water it down to where if I'm talking to an 8-year-old, they can understand what I'm going to say, like building analogies. If I'm talking to an 18-year-old, I can get a little more in depth at it if they've taken an anatomy class or a physics class or something of that nature. Like, how do I relate to the kids? I think that's where I thrive, honestly, is building the relationships and being able to relay the information that I have, regardless of who it is. The second is constantly asking questions. So, like, I knew that I had a pretty good understanding of the shoulder. My friend Kelly, who I trained with out in Colorado, she was very, very good with lower half rehabilitation because she played soccer in college. She was an intern with, I think it was at Iowa, maybe. It was a Big Ten school,
Okay.
but she worked in strength and conditioning with a soccer team there. And then she works with primarily soccer and a little bit of basketball up in Colorado. So when it came to ankles, knees, hips, I was just picking her brain as much as I could because she's absolutely brilliant. And so I can take the information from her and now go relay it to somebody else. And like in the facility that I work in now, we also have a physical therapy center. So not only do we have the strength and conditioning aspect of things, we also have the ability to provide physical therapy for the athletes that come into our facility. So I can hang out with Dr. Gordon and Dr. Chandler all day, and I listen in on some of their sessions or what they're doing with their clients. If it's a shoulder rehab or a hip rehab or whatever, like why are we doing X, Y, and Z? And I think that kind of helps me separate um, not just having a one track mind, right? It's like when I see somebody who's running and they have that like inversion or they pronate a little bit too much when they run, or maybe they supinate a little bit too much when they run. What is that going to mess with the chain that's going to potentially lead to an injury moving forward? So, how do I prevent that from happening and then teach them some of those stability movements that they need to be doing to make sure that injury doesn't happen along the way? So I think part of it too is just being around the right people to learn as much as possible because I think too many people think like, well, this is my system, this is my philosophy, this is the gold standard. And that's just not the case. There's so much new information coming out on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis that if you're not trying to evolve and adapt and try new things and learn new things, then you're going to be stuck in a rut and somebody else is going to come up with the next best thing. So I always want to make sure that I'm never the person um, that's stuck in my own systems.
Yeah,
Does
I
that
love
make
it.
sense? I feel like that was kind of long-winded.
No, I love it. And I think it totally makes sense. It actually leads me to a question that, I try to prep people I interview, but it's always going to lead to different ways. Like you were talking about essentially continuing education,
Yeah.
adapt or die type mentality. Like who are people that you would call mentors and then maybe not even mentors, but reliable sources that you get information from to make sure that you're most up to date?
Yeah, I think even some of just the people that I, have worked with in the past, like I said, like Mitch Deaton was a huge
Mhm.
influence in my training style. Um, and he's not a well-known person, but he's a guy that I really like. I spent a lot of time with. I wanted to pick his brain as much as possible. I wanted to learn as much as I could while I was with him. Kelly Mack, I can't pronounce her last name, so it's Kelly Mack. Was awesome for lower body rehabilitation, helping me kind of learn the ankles and hips a little bit more. She led me on to Austin Jokum, who is an absolute unit of a human. Um, but he works with baseball players too, and he does a lot of and I think most athletes. But I know that he talks a lot about baseball. Dr. Heenan, who's the 90-mile-per-hour formula guy,
Yeah.
breaks a lot down. Um, I'm trying to think of other people. Dr. Gordon has been my biggest mentor here in the last 6 or 7 months since I've been working with him. So he actually used to be the head athletic trainer for the U.S. men's baseball team, um, which was a really cool experience for him. And he
For
got to meet
sure.
and go around the world. Um, but he's been in physical therapy for the last probably 30 years now, and,
Mhm.
specifically working with baseball players. So like Tucker Barnhart, Carlos Rodon, Lance Lynn are guys that come into Pro X during their off season so that he can work with them. And then some of the pitchers work with a guy named Jay Lear. So when we're talking about specifically like baseball, the people that I've been around for the last 6 or 7 months are people who have changed my thought process on like, here's how we need to go about things, how you adjust your volume based on what time of the season you're um, in season and off season. Um, I think those are some of the biggest. And then when we start talking about like nutrition and how to take care of your body, my friend Indy Vasquez, who I met out in Colorado at the Westminster location, she just got her doctorate in holistic health. But she kind of flipped up my ways of thinking about how we should eat, how to time things, what kind of supplements we should be taking, how to wash your food correctly, like little things like that.
Interesting.
Using baking soda when you're washing like fruits and vegetables to get all the stuff out that you don't even see is in there. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, there's a lot, and I've got friends who have been to chiropractic school, occupational therapy. Danielle Johnson, who's a really good friend of mine, um, she when she first got her doctorate, she was working on me quite a bit. Honestly, kind of like a test dummy. Like, hey, I just got certified and everything. Like, I need people to work on, and so her and I'll sit and just like kind of geek out about the human body, and it's fun. Like when you have friends who have those same interests, they're in the same kind of realm that you are, and so you guys can really dive in and get deep into, um, just the stuff that interests you. But I think the human body is incredible in what it can do, and also how much you can manipulate it as much as you want.
Mhm.
And so, like, that's the end goal is how do I manipulate it to make sure that it's going to be as beneficial as possible when you get ready for performance.
I love that. And I think that actually leads beautifully into my next thought of
Mm,
we were talking off camera a little bit
mm,
about how when you get or as you start figuring out like what is athletic performance, like people start thinking about the strength, like the strength and conditioning coach that are at the
mm,
highest level. But we were talking specifically about how a lot of at least my experiences, our experiences was making not necessarily a better baseball player, but making a better athlete as a
yeah.
whole. Um, I want you to talk to me about like what that looks like because so many people start thinking ba- baseball.
Mm,
All I have to do is rotate, or one little thing like that. Or the flip side that a lot of especially high school athletes have the football coach that maybe he played college football and now he's bringing his college football program into every single training session, whether it's a female soccer team, men's basketball team, so on and so forth. What talk to me about like true athletic performance?
yeah. So I think that's the biggest frustration that I see now. And when I first started at Pro X, that's what Dr. Gordon was telling me would happen. He goes, "You're going to see a lot of stupid things, and it's going to come from maybe somebody's head coach or a strength coach that's kind of set in their ways and very old school." So there was a girl who came into class, and she was coming to speed classes and strength classes, and so she goes, "Hey, can I show you my programming? I just want to know like what your thoughts are on it." And she had hang cleans 3 days a week. She's a freshman in high school. She's never done heavy squats or deadlifts, and now we're putting all of those things together in one explosive movement. It's a recipe for disaster. So
Mhm.
I think if you're a football player, yeah, let's break down cleans, specifically hang cleans. I don't think that you really need to pull those from the floor. I know people love doing power cleans, but like for a performance setting, hang cleans make more sense. And also, like, do you have the shoulder mobility, the lat mobility or flexibility to be able to put yourself in that position, the wrist flexibility to put yourself in that position? Because if you can't catch your clean in a proper front squat, then you're going to have some issues. And so, okay, how do we address those things? Because most football coaches in college are going to have their guys do hang cleans. So if that's something that you plan on doing, like, let's make sure you're prepared there. For baseball, I don't think that's a necessary thing. And I know that there's a lot of baseball coaches out there, or maybe strength coaches, who are going to disagree with me, but this is very much a Louis Simmons mindset that I picked up. Why would I take 6 to 12 weeks to teach a kid how to do a hang clean or a power clean or a snatch if the goal is to try to gain explosiveness? Because what I can do with them is I can teach them how to deadlift properly in probably a third of the amount of time, and then have them pull through bands or squat through bands or press through bands, and then have them do just a ton of jumping. So in the last 8 weeks, we've really taken a deep dive into plyometrics with the kids that we work with in our program. and they do a bunch of like pogo hops, rebounds. I call them vert repeats, but it's essentially like a max effort jump 4 times in a row, and you just cover a little bit of distance along the way. And what we saw when we started jumping more is obviously their jumping got a little more efficient, it got stronger, it got better. But most kids, and we have a pool of about 45 to 50 kids who come to these classes every week. Most kids that they were consistently coming 2 or 3 days a week saw an increase of about 8 to 10 inches on their broad jump and anywhere from 3 to 5 inches on their vertical. And it's because they're not doing any jumping when they go to practice, when they go to their strength programs. Like sometimes they throw in box jumps, but they're not doing any like depth drops to vertical or depth drop to lateral bound or doing things to specifically work on their hips or jumping form and learning how to decelerate into the ground. And all of those things are going to help increase, stiffness and tendons, which is going to increase more pliability, but also explosiveness. And it's also going to decrease their potential risk of injury. So like all of those things together has been really good for the kids. They're getting stronger because they're more explosive. Like everything kind of bounds together. And then if you think about too, like the sport of baseball as a whole, right? You could be a right fielder that doesn't get a ball for 9 innings, and maybe you have 4 strikeouts and you're rolling with a golden sombrero right now. So like, but bottom of the ninth, somebody hits a gap shot and you have to get on your horse, take off, go get the ball, and maybe make a play at the plate. How are you going to be prepared for that jump if you've been sitting still and cold for the last 2 hours? And people who talk about contrast training are saying that jumping is probably the best way to stay prepared for having to be explosive at any given time. And so after reading and listening on some of those concepts, it makes more sense to throw in a lot of jumping to our stuff. And now as like we're getting closer to the season, we're kind of backing down on the weight volume that we're doing and working more on like getting your body game ready. So making sure that we're staying as explosive as possible, but also making sure that we're not taking away from some of those max effort movements, because what the last thing that I want to do is build up all of this strength and then never tap into it again during the season when the only thing that we're doing is max effort movements the whole time. Like when you swing as hard as you can every time. When you throw the ball, it should be as hard as you can every time. And if we're not taxing the CNS in the same way, then your body isn't as prepared as it is at the beginning of the season as it is at the end. So like that process too, when we talk about programming in the high school realm, like, or even in college too, I saw it my freshman year. We do all of this strength training, and then once we get to season, we never pick up a bar heavy again. And it might be 3 or 4 days before we play, but nobody
Mhm.
wants to lift anything heavy. So you're not keeping your CNS prepared, or central nervous system prepared, for people who don't know what I mean by CNS, uh,
Mhm.
prepared for the demand that it's about to have. And so I'm a big believer in, okay, if I have a game 72 hours from now, 48 hours before it, I'm going to get a heavy lift in. 24 hours before, I'm going to do a bunch of myofascial release. And it's not going to be a ton of volume, because if you're doing, let's say, 5 sets of one at a 90% or 70%, and you throw on band tension, then you don't have the same amount of weight stress, but you're doing some accommodative resistance. That's going to make sure that your body is still staying prepared throughout the course of the season, but you're not going to get yourself hurt because you're not doing a ton of volume in regards to like the amount of weight that you're moving on a day-to-day basis. You're just keeping your body kind of in the same state as it was when you're doing your off-season training.
Mhm. Yeah, dude, I love everything you're saying, and it just makes me wish I had access to this knowledge back when I was playing. Like, I didn't get a true strength and conditioning coach until my last year of playing in college, which was
Yeah,
my happened to be my junior year because I didn't play my senior year, just too
yeah,
much injury and wanted to get out.
yeah,
Um, so it everything you're saying just makes me wish I had that. And when I was introduced to it, I started falling in love with it. So I wish that I had not only had it, but had it for longer. Like maybe wish I was a little bit younger and could have been a freshman coming in and having all of that. And life may have turned out differently, but who knows? That's another subject for another day.
yeah. I
Um,
always make that joke too. Like if I would have had the information, like I never learned how to hit until I was a sophomore in college. Like I could make good contact with the ball, but then my
mhm.
coach looked at me and was like, dude, you deadlift 450 pounds. Why are you not hitting the ball over the fence? I go, I don't know. I've just been told not to strike out. And he goes, hit it at the fence or over it. I don't care if you strike out. And I go, this makes this game so much more fun. So
Oh
like
yeah.
doing stuff like heavy split squats and heavy single leg RDLs and lateral lunges, like understanding how to move both parts of the body at the same time, getting into the hip
Mhm.
more, learning how to create separation, like those things all made me a better hitter. But then the weight room also, like you put 50 pounds on your deadlift and you put 10 pounds on your body, the ball goes 40 feet farther due to physics. Um,
Mhm.
if I would have learned how to hit as a sophomore in high school and then know what I know about strength and conditioning now, I feel like I go to IU, not IWU. So like and I love my experience at Westland. Met some great people there. But I think that if I knew today, or if I knew when I was 16 what I know today, I think it goes a little bit differently for me.
Oh, absolutely, and I completely agree. If I I didn't even have a college coach that told me to do that, and I was the strongest one in our weight room.
Yeah.
I was just came up just similar as you, came up through the put the ball in play, good things happen type thing,
Yeah.
and it very much limited your athleticism at the plate because you were so tight or whatever, or just trying to make contact
Yep.
as opposed to being the free swingers like we're seeing now. I'm not going to get into like launch angles of hitting or anything, but
Yeah.
just the freeness and the keeping things moving and at the plate and still being athletic. But reverting back to what we were talking about, because I was jotting down questions and trying to
Yeah.
figure out where I wanted to lead this. Um, and where I want to lead is you started talking about programming and a lot of
Yeah.
like the 5x1s and
Mhm.
getting things prepared. I wanted to kind of get into because I know Louis Simmons and I don't know Louis Simmons, but I'm very familiar with the West Side Barbell type of
Yeah.
training. Um, when it comes to programming, like he's very big into like that conjugate type training, and then there's versus the linear
Mhm.
programming. What are the differences in those, and what are like the pros and cons of it, especially in comparison to your high school coach telling you to go do power cleans when you've never touched a barbell before?
Yeah. So linear periodization to me is outdated. And it's what you get taught of like, here's a strength phase and then a power phase and then a hypertrophy phase and then an endurance phase. Right. Well,
Mhm.
the issue with that is similar to what we were talking about of keeping your central nervous system prepared, right? So like NASM standards, NSCA standards, they all say start with hypertrophy, which makes sense because you're trying to focus on, motor unit recruitment, which is more muscle fibers firing. And the more that you do those reps, the more your body is going to get an understanding, like your brain starts to understand how to move a little more efficiently.
Mhm.
So people will typically go 4 to 6 weeks in a hypertrophy phase. So we're doing anywhere from, I think it's like 60 or 75 to 85% and anywhere from 8 to 12 reps. Right. And whoever made the rep ranges, like the gold standard, I don't understand where they came up with those things. You still get hypertrophy working with 30% and doing 25 to 30 reps. Like
Yep.
all happens. Volume is volume. So the way that I kind of utilize or I guess build programming is truly off of conjugate. So it's one day we're going to move stuff heavy and then we're going to focus hypertrophy. 72 hours later, we're going to move stuff fast and then we're going to focus on more of that like muscular endurance. So let's say Monday, I'm doing a lower body day. We're going to do like a squat or a deadlift. We're going to hit anywhere from 90 to 95% of our one rep max. And maybe we're doing sets of 3, sets of 5, sets of 6. I don't know what that looks like depending on where we're at in the phase. And also, like,
Right.
what's your training age? Are you new to the weight room or do you have 6 years of experience? Because if you have 6 years of experience, we can have some fun and we can move some weight. If not, we're going to stay around that 6 to 8 rep range, but we're not really going to go higher than that on some of the bigger movements because I don't want form to break down. Once we get done with that main movement, then the accessory movements are going to be anywhere from 8 to 12 reps. And I think as like, again, a hypertrophy, like learning how to do these movements a little bit better, making sure that we're loading the same movement patterns and movement
Mhm.
patterns that are going to help them. So like we talked about a little bit earlier, most kids are sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day because of class. And so now they're rounded shoulders. They're not utilizing their hips or their hamstrings at all. So I'm going to focus on backside more than anything, shoulders, upper back, hamstrings, hips, glutes. Most kids have weak glutes too, like weak glutes,
Absolutely.
weak low traps, and that's what leads to some of their injuries. Weak core. So like that's a big thing that I hammer with these kids is like YSTLs, lateral bounds, lateral lunges, anything in different planes to kind of get their body working in different directions so that they have stability in all different planes. And then again, that's long-winded for the max effort days. So like 72 hours
Yep.
after that, then we're going to work in anywhere from a 30 to 60% um, of your one rep max. And we might add some band tension if you have training experience. If you don't, then we're probably going to just stay with that lighter weight and we're going to increase the amount of jumping that we're doing on some of those explosive days. As we get closer to the season, we're going to kind of ramp down the volume, or I guess lower down the volume that we're doing as far as what we're doing in the weight room, because you are building up your volume in throwing. And so to make sure that we're not, hurting anybody or putting too much volume on the body, we're going to do a little bit less in the weight room, and then we're going to start to increase more of those explosive patterns. So rotational med ball throws, um, shot puts, jumping, sled work, like things like that are going to help make sure that you're staying explosive and not necessarily losing the strength, but also like at least once or twice a week, we're going to do some heavy stuff. It's just not going to be to the same capacity as it was when you're in November as when you get to March, right? Like March is going to be very little, um, not volume, but it's going to be, I guess, a little volume, right? We're still going to do some max effort stuff, but the accessory
Yeah,
work is not going to be the same amount of intensity and the same amount of volume, if
makes
that
sense.
makes sense.
Oh, that no, 100% makes sense, and something that I want to make sure of because like we're talking, like you and I understand this stuff. We
Yeah.
speak very much the same language, but all of like I'm listening to all of this, and I can just see people like listening to this podcast and
Yeah.
being like, "Holy crap!" Um, how do you keep this simple? Because
Yeah.
this is stuff that goes on in the coach's mind, but how do you
Yeah.
keep it simple for the athlete?
Yeah. So for the athletes that we're working with, because most of them aren't to a capacity yet or a training age where they're going to do one full max effort day and then 72 hours later do a full dynamic day, as far as like upper body, lower body, how West Side normally would program it. So what I'll
Mhm.
do with them is I'll go upper body push and lower body pull, and then upper body pull. Yeah, upper body pull, lower body push. So like one day is going to be more presses and more hamstring and glute work. The other day is going to be more rows and squats. And so with both of those days, they're also going to do some sort of jumping. They're going to do some sort of rotation or anti-rotation movement. Um, and we're going to work in multiple planes throughout both of those days. And plus, most of these kids also come to a speed and agility class. So I don't have to take up 20
Nice.
minutes of a strength class to do jumping with them, because they're getting most of that when we do speed and agility. So in the speed and agility, we'll do some sort of plyometric, we'll do change of direction, um, and we'll do some sprint, not necessarily mechanic, because I think the more that you just get kids to move, the more efficient they will get at moving, especially when
For
you're trying to
sure.
do stuff like a max sprint. So that's kind of the nice part about where we're at, is that we just flow straight into the weight room. They're already warmed up, ready to go. They've already done their hip work. They've already done through their jumping series to focus on ACL injury prevention. And then we can kind of just hammer the weights, and they're in and out in like 90 minutes.
I love that. And something I'm just kind of popped up in my head was when you for people that are going to look into Louis Simmons and the West Side Barbell System or are familiar with it, you typically see 4 training days in that system.
Yeah.
But since we're talking about athletes that are their training age is low because they're in high school, we can assume it's low because their overall age is low.
Yeah.
Um, how do you program that out? Because I hear you talking about a lot about like, hey, we're going to hit it hard, and 72 hours later we're going to hit it hard. Are you looking more at a 3 day a week, 2 day a week system, or how does that work?
I think with kids that are 13 to probably 15, you can see serious gains with 2 days a week. With kids as they start to get older, that's where I would maybe go more towards a 3 day a week system. And so you're still doing total body workouts 3 days a week. So you could go the upper body push, lower body pull, flip it. And then the last day of the week, do full body. So you're doing all of those movements: a squat, a row, a hinge, a lunge, rotation, and some sort of press. And so if you knock out all of those things, and even if you wanted to start and use that third template for all 3 days and just flip up the movements on them, I think you're going to get solid results with it. It also makes sure that your body feels fresh as you start to do some of your sport specific stuff too. So I think you could go one of two ways with that, but I think 3 days is probably ideal. 4, you're going to see more growth, but I also think that, like you said, that comes down to training age. I'm not going to have a kid doing like max effort squats 100% as much as he can do if he hasn't been under a barbell for more than 6 months. It just doesn't make any sense.
For sure. And another piece I want to get to, and here I imagine this might be a pretty long-winded answer, which is 100% okay.
Yep.
Um, we've been talking about like all the training intensities and then like ramping down towards season.
Mhm.
If you were going to take an athlete and just say they're, because I feel like a lot of people, it's probably junior, senior year of high school is about the age when they can start driving is the age that they start actually lifting. So you take someone in like that and start whatever age you want at that point.
Mm,
Um, what does a training year kind of look like? So say, and for the sake of this
mm.
situation, say you get them in the summer. So they just got out of school. Don't worry about uh summer travel sports or anything. You're prepping for in season baseball or softball. What does a typical periodization look like for you?
Yeah. The nice thing about conjugate is that that doesn't really change too much, right? Because you do have the max intensity. And so, like, when we talk about percentages, let's say we get to the point where now we're doing your 3 rep max or 5 rep max every single week. Well, now when I go to that dynamic effort day or I start working at that 30 to 60%, I'm taking it off of the number that I just got. So it's not like we're doing a linear periodization where we're constantly changing the intensities every 4 weeks, but I know the intensity on Monday is going to be the same intensity every single Monday. And then the intensity on Thursday is going to be the same intensity every single Thursday. Um, so let's say it's August, right? We just finished up the school year, right? Or my bad, we're getting back into the school year. Okay.
Mhm.
I would take somebody anywhere from 3 to 4 days a week, and we would run like a true conjugate system. As we get closer to November, that's when we're really going to focus on hitting the weights as hard as possible. Like this is, let's say overall, this is a kid that plays baseball and only plays baseball. There's a good
Okay.
chance that he's probably playing fall ball with his high school or with a group. So during that time, we're going to treat that more like in season. So August, September, or a little bit of October, we're going to treat that like in season, where it's a couple max effort lifts a week, and then really focusing on keeping the body feeling good. Once we get out of October, we need a little bit of a rest period. Once the end of October, beginning of November hits, that's when we're going to start to ramp up stuff in the weight room. There's going to be very little throwing. So, like in our program, we do no throw November, where if you're doing any sort of pitching lessons or you're in the academy, you're going to do more holds. So, it's taking a weighted ball and basically going through all of the throwing drills that you would normally do, but you're not going to release it. And so, what we've found is that if you look at like tennis, right? Tennis very rarely has shoulder injuries. They mostly have elbow injuries because they don't release the racket. So they have to hold on and decelerate as much as they focus on accelerating. So during that time, we're hitting the weights super hard. We're not throwing at all. We're trying to make sure that we have the hips ready to go, that we have the mobility aspect in there too, because if you're riding down the mound or even like swinging all the time, like your hips are going to feel shot. Um, as we get into end of February, beginning of March, or I guess middle of February, beginning of March, that's when we're going to start to go down in volume in the weight room and increase volume in throwing to make sure that we're getting the shoulder ready to go. But that's kind of what we've found has worked the best to make sure that a shoulder can stay healthy throughout the next 6 months that they're going to be playing. Because if you are somebody like, let's say they do play travel ball, you start your first games beginning of April, and then you don't get done playing until probably September, October. So you have, you know, most kids are going to play 24 games, maybe 30 games if you're lucky, and you go into a sectional, regional, state championship. And then you're going to have 30 ish games over the summer, and then probably another 15 in the fall. So it's like, how do we make sure that you're going to feel good? And so that whole time is more of like an in season. I don't want to say maintenance because I hate the phrase maintenance. You still want to make sure that you're staying strong, but you are trying to just maintain that your central nervous system is able to fire the way that it was when you were hitting it hard during the off
Mhm.
season.
Got it. No, I like it. I completely agree with it, obviously.
Mhm.
Do you typically take a athlete through like a GPP at the beginning, or is that just a very dependent question?
I think it's naturally in there, right? Like
Okay.
teaching them, like most kids are going to start out with like a 5x5, right? And we're going to work at like 75%. And we're going to get their body prepared for the volume that they're going to be doing over the next months and like getting them used to the movement patterns. Sled work, making sure that they're hitting like bands for their shoulders. Um, yeah, no, I think that has to happen with every athlete. Like you have to have that baseline before you can start getting specific with anything, right? So like if a kid's coming into a speed class, we're not going to immediately start them off with like, or let's say like I have my normal 20 kids that come to speed class. Well, when I go and start a new group, right, or work with a new group, they're not going to be starting in the progressions that I'm working with and the kids that I've seen for the last 6 months. They're going to
Mhm.
start with like lunge series. Here's how we learn how to get off the ground. Here's how we press into the ground. Here's how we learn how to jump and decelerate properly. And then from there, we can start having some more fun and doing some more reactive work and things like that. So I think just naturally, how I program or how we program even at ProX as a whole, GPP is built into everything because you have to create that baseline before we can start getting specific. Like if you can't rotate your body at all, it's going to be very hard for you to throw a baseball successfully. So we have to
Right.
learn these movement patterns before we can start getting very specific and getting into those minute little details that are going to take you from a good player to a great player. Right? Like we can talk about here's how you ride down the mountain, but if you don't know how to externally rotate in your hip and stay in that position and stay over your back leg, everything that I say beyond that is not going to do anything to benefit you.
Um, I mean, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I guess where I want to go next with this is because we're talking about all this great information and and it's obviously services that you provide and
Mhm.
um but I can also see a situation where athlete comes to you, they work with you all summer, they're going to continue to work with you when school starts, and they go back to that strength and conditioning coach that wants to do their thing. How
Mhm.
do you have that conversation with that athlete to then have that conversation with
Yeah.
someone that thinks they know better already?
Yeah. And sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not, right?
Of
And
course.
that's always the double-edged sword. Luckily, like the Westfield strength coach, I used to work with him at LA Fitness. Like
Mhm.
apparently he just is very similar to I am and he doesn't sit still. So he would train people in the morning and then he'd go to school. And then over the summers, like it gave him something to do when he wasn't in the weight room. So
Mhm.
Tavio is an absolute stud, like played for the Panthers for a little bit. I think he went to Tennessee and played football, like just a unit of a dude. But he does a really good job of connecting with the kids, pushing them, but also like his programming is solid. Um, I can have conversations with him whenever I want. Like, hey, this is what I'm seeing in this athlete. Like, I know that she comes to you for softball twice a week. Make sure you keep an eye out on this. Awesome. The guy at it's going to bug me. She just transferred schools and she's had pars fractures in her low back. She usually has a bunch of tension in between
I
her
was gonna say,
shoulder
what are
blades.
pars fractures?
It's it's almost like a step before a true fracture in your back. And I don't it's an acronym for something and I cannot remember what it is for the life of me, but I know that
Got
we
it.
have
No
to be
worries.
careful. We have to be careful with her hinge like loading and a hinge and rotation at the same time, which is not great when you think about what the sport of softball is.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, it's working more on like strengthening up her core, strengthening up her hips, and all the things that are going to help kind of prevent any other low back injuries. So when she transferred schools, she told me that she was getting ready to go to the weights sessions for softball, and she comes and sees me on Saturdays, and I was doing her programming the other 2 days a week. So I asked the dad, I was like, "Hey, can you get me connected to the strength coach? Like, I just want to give him the information I have." And Connor's a great dude. He actually trains out of a facility here in Indianapolis where they were coached by Louis Simmons when they were over in Columbus. So like they're true West Side guys. So when I figured out that it was Kowalski, I was like, okay, like this dude knows his stuff. You're in good hands. I just basically gave him the movement screen that I took her through. Here are the things that I'm focusing on. Here are the things that I notice, and here are the things that she's got to kind of isolate to make sure that she doesn't get hurt. We have to stay away from X, Y, and Z. We need to add in these things. He was awesome. Thanks for the information. Like, I'll keep you connected if anything sounds weird or if I see anything when I'm with her. Like, perfect. If I can have those conversations with strength coaches at schools, my life is so easy. But when it's like
Sure.
a small town school where there's 500 kids and the strength coach is just a football coach that doesn't actually have a strength background, that's when I have a headache. So it's trying to, you almost have to butter them up a little bit.
Mhm.
Like, hey, listen, I know that you know everything that you're doing. Like, you're doing a great job. I just want to give my input. Like, can we have a conversation? And if you can do that, and I do a pretty good job of connecting with most people. Obviously, we can tell that I'm a talker, so that helps me out a little bit. But No, I think sometimes if you approach it the correct way, it can be very beneficial for you and the athlete and the other coach as well. And sometimes it's makes you want to run your head through a wall.
Mm,
And there's usually no in
understood.
between.
I completely understand that, and I can only imagine that. Um, what I'm really glad to hear is that you take it upon yourself to try to have those conversations. You don't put it all on the 13-year-old boy or 16-year-old girl or whoever it might be, anything in between.
Yeah.
So that's what I love to hear, and it's that you're truly trying to help people. And
Mhm.
helping is something that I want to go kind of general with the next question, as far
Yeah.
as like how how can you or how do you help? And obviously, if they follow you on Instagram, it
Mhm.
helps a lot. Like, how do you help those high school athletes that are in that situation where they're a, I don't know, track and field person doing a football workout because they're in that small school, or don't have a strength coach at all and they want to get better? What is kind of, I guess, how can we help those people?
Yeah. I have plenty of remote clients that are around the country. Like this is kind of wild. My mom is a competitive wake surfer. So she is ranked fifth in the world in the master's class. So I do her programming. She lives out in Vegas now. And so,
Wow.
I use either True Coach or Train Heroic. It just depends on who I'm working with. Um, and most of those um, platforms have videos. So, like, if you don't know what the movement looks like, here's a reference, and where I can go in and I can
Hmm.
upload my own videos. Um, I think part of it is just the guidance, right? And so, like, with being at ProX, awesome, right? Like, we have all the tools that we can possibly think of. With the people that I train with from my personal training business, Manx strength. I know that was something that I think we were going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, that is more. I don't know where I want to go with that. Um, Manx strength to me, like the name came to itself. One, like I've got Irish heritage, so I wanted to kind of do something with that name and something that sounds like powerful. But the Manx symbol itself is a triscale, right? And so it's like three kind of swirls put together. And I loved that image so much and that thought process so much because I think of like coaching as a whole has three aspects to it. It's guidance, support, and accountability. And when health, three aspects to it. You have mental, physical, and spiritual. And when I think about like programming, it's strength, it's conditioning or cardiovascular, and proper nutrition. And so to me, like threes just kept popping up and popping up and popping up. And like even being in a religious background, like went to Indiana Wesleyan, grew up strong Lutheran, um, cross on my arm, like threes, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
It just kind of all flowed together. And when I saw that like image and that all three parts are not bigger than any of them, but they all kind of like interflow together, it made sense to me. And so that's kind of what I want to provide for people. Like, yes, I care about your performance. Yes, I care about, your weight loss goals or whatever, but like, are you happy? Are you healthy? Like, where are you at in your life? And how can I be that kind of support system alongside you? Because like we're in this together. Like the moment that you and I start working together, like we're going from A to B and we're locking arms while we do it. Like you're not on this thing alone. And so that's I think the biggest way that I can help, whether it's programming or having the conversations or even just like speaking to somebody for the first time, like, hey, if you need just a template and you can go in and figure it out yourself, great. I can get that to you in 30 seconds. If you need a coach, like I can do that for you. And it's sometimes just conversation like this over like a Zoom call or a FaceTime or whatever it may be. Like I'm not
Hmm.
the great part about technology is that like you, myself, people that I work with, like we're not locked to one space anymore. We can go work
Right.
with anybody who has the access to a facility that just needs a program, or even if we have to FaceTime during your session, we can do that too. Like it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to it, and I want to give you the floor real
Mhm.
again to talk about, like, it's man strength, man strength.
Manx,
Sorry.
Manx, Manx.
Okay, I knew it was MANX, but I was like, is it man X strength?
That's
But
what everybody thinks too. And so on the document, it's all caps. Manx is all caps. And like on the
got
shirts
it.
and too, like I've got one on, but yeah, no, so Manx is all cap, one word.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I was looking for just like ideas of like I want something to do with a little bit of like the Irish heritage. Like Dodd is an Irish surname. Um,
Mhm.
one of my logos that I have is like an Irish elk, which is really cool. I've got a cartoon design. I'll show you when we get done here. But I'm
That's
gonna
cool.
throw it on some t-shirts too. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It just kind of resonated. Like when I saw the image, when I saw what it kind of stood for, when I saw like the three equal parts, like it just all made
Mhm.
sense. And I think that's a really good, visual for most things.
For sure. And what I want to know now is about with Manx strength. Like you told me about kind of how the verbiage of it and
Mhm.
the visual of it came about. How did like even the idea of starting it come about for you? And like what's your goal and purpose with doing it?
Yeah. That's a good question. Obviously, like I love training. I've been doing it for the
Mhm.
last 5, 6 years. With moving around the country, like being locked in my own facility makes it kind of hard. Like, yes, I see one-on-one people here in the studio that I'm currently sitting in. I see people over at Pro X, but it gives me the ability to have a bigger reach. And I think that's why I decided, okay, I can do remote training, I can do in-person training. Like I can go anywhere I want. If I want to take a vacation, I have the ability to do that because I can train people from wherever. I can do programming from wherever. I can take on virtual clients.
Mhm.
My biggest goal is just to educate, and I think that's what I look forward to the most. Like, yes, I'm a trainer, but I feel like I'm more of an educator than anything, which is why I enjoy the coaching aspect, whether it's in the weight room or as a baseball coach on the side. Like having the ability to teach as many people all of the stuff that I got cooking on up here. Like that's my biggest goal. And I think, like I said earlier, I know I'm not the smartest man on the planet, but I think it's a disservice to other people if I don't have the conversations with them to try to help them and teach them and make sure that they understand how to do things correctly. Because there's a lot of eyewash on the internet nowadays. There's a
Oh
lot of
man.
stupid out there. Um, and so I know that like let's even say like taking on other strength coaches, right? Like having people who are working underneath me, like I'm trying to educate them too, because if I can make three or four or five or 10 of me and make them good strength coaches who can connect with kids, who can, connect with their clients, maybe it's older population, then I feel like I've done my job because now they can go on and they can go impact another 50, 100,000 people, whatever it is. But as one person, I can't do all of that by myself. So that's kind of my vision with both, Pro X, with what I'm doing with Manx. Um, I want to help. I want to educate as many people as possible. Um, I want to make sure that people know that there are resources out there, people who care about them. Um, that's what coaching is all about.
Yeah, for sure. And are you currently offering like mentorships like that if someone was interested in doing it?
Um, I will have, I think over the summer, I'm planning on doing an internship. Um, with that, it's probably going to be a college kid from either Westland, UND, one of these spaces. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think there's a lot of times where like I take people either under my wing, not necessarily on purpose, or like I've got a younger strength coach who just started with us around the same time that I did actually, but he went from no experience, like fresh out of school. This is first base. Um, it was actually funny to watch him work at first because the first time he had a class with like 12 kids, you can just see him like, what do I do? Like people are standing
Right.
around, we're supposed to be moving. Like I take control, bring your dad voice out. Like you unfortunately have the 6 to 8 year olds or the 7 to 10 year olds. Like it's gonna be a little bit harder to keep their attention, but you have
Yeah.
the ability to do so. Um, and so just kind of like teaching him, like, here's how you present yourself. Like we talked about this a lifetime. When you
Mhm.
teach an alpha class, when you teach a cut class, like you're not just a coach in this scenario, you're a performer because you're trying to see that grow. And so I said,
Mhm.
yes, I want you to have a great relationship with the kids because the kids are going to keep asking to come back. But if the parents are sitting around and they're seeing that their kids are having a good time, that they're moving their bodies, that they're getting better at moving their bodies. And you can laugh with the kids, you can laugh with the parents, like you build that relationship with them too. They're never going to go anywhere else because they know that they've found their space. So it's like you almost have to have some sort of stage presence while you're out there, like how you demonstrate, how you talk to the kids, how you just carry yourself a little bit. And so like that was the biggest learning curve for him. It's not necessarily the education about training. It was more like, here's how you conduct a class and here's how you control a class. And then I have another girl who just came in a couple days ago who's looking for some more strength and conditioning opportunities. And so there's a good chance we're going to hire her on to start in the weight room, help us build up, a volleyball and soccer clientele because we don't really have a ton of those right now,
Mhm.
and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's great, and giving the opportunity not only to for you to continue teaching people and educating people because that's where your passion lies, but people that have the passion and want to learn how to do it. I think that's a great umbrella effect that you're going to be able to have.
Mhm.
Um, going back a little bit, just because I think it would be a disservice if I didn't ask this question about kind of the training aspect, but we spoke a little bit on mobility slash injury prevention.
Yeah.
And I think that's a piece of the pie or whatever that you want to call it, the equation that gets neglected a lot.
Most.
Yeah, the most. Um, what I guess how do you incorporate it? Because you like we were talking about, you only have maybe 60 to 90 minutes,
Yeah.
and you can you're gonna put well, you're not, you're already bald, but people will pull their hair out trying to get
I can pull it off
teenagers to
my face.
have yeah, you'll go baby face again.
Yeah.
um, but it'll cause people so much stress trying to get a 13 to 16-year-old to go foam roll or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So how do you incorporate that for those coaches that are listening or people that are going to be training on their own that need to incorporate mobility work in?
Yeah. So it's got to be programmed into the day. It can't be
Mhm.
something where you tell them to go do it on their own because they're not going to do it, just like you said.
Yeah, I'm not going
So
to do it. So,
no, I have to before I do like a heavy squat or deadlift, or if I want to go
mhm.
hit cleans myself. But if I'm doing like an upper body day, I'm hitting J bands for like 30 seconds. Like, all right, we're good. Let's go.
Exactly.
So, and I know that kids are going to do the same thing. So
Yep.
we get into speed class. We always start with dynamic. So, your normal high knees, A skips. I'm starting to get them to learn C skips so that they can open up their hips a little bit more, which is hilarious to watch the first couple weeks that you do it.
I can
Uh,
imagine.
and then after we do that, we go into our plyometric stuff. So we're working on being springy. We hit some sprint work. We'll do some change of direction. Maybe we'll play a game so they have to incorporate all three of those things. And they're kind of getting tricked into doing more conditioning without understanding that they're doing more conditioning. And then
Hmm.
before we head to their weight room, we do our hip band series. So like Z steps, side steps, toe taps. And then I have them all do glute bridges, clamshells, and then we head to the weight room. And so once we get in the weight room, then we do our jumping series, which is like the ACL injury prevention. Um, so they're still getting some explosiveness. They're focusing on strength around the areas of the body that are typically weak. And then when they're doing their bigger movements, I throw in like mobility stuff as like their superset. So like it's an active recovery in between. So like we might go do some wall swims or reverse arm slides in between our pressing sets. Or like if we're doing deadlifts, then maybe we do dead bugs afterwards. So you're working a little bit of hip mobility, a little bit of core strength, a little bit of shoulder stability. Like that way it's included. And then by the time they get to the end of their workout, then they have like their hip 90/90s, their calf stretches, hip crossovers, stuff like that. That's already included into the program, but it's how they finish their day so that they still have some sort of mobility aspect before they take off.
Got it. No, I love that. That's, I mean, I had the hardest part is program because if I do my own programming, I'm going to probably skip over it. But
Yep.
that's the way that I've had to do it is program it in to the workout.
Yep.
And it's like, well, crap. And because I'm also one of the type of person that's, if it's on the program, I'm not going to skip it.
Yep.
So it's going to get done. So I think that is the best way of doing it and the most efficient way is
Mhm.
exactly what you were doing or what you are doing. Um, but man, we're getting about to the hour mark.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that you want to discuss before we close it out?
I feel like we talked about a lot.
And
I
I
don't
think we
I
could
don't know.
keep going if we wanted to.
Honestly, you're not wrong. I've got hours. Maybe we can one day get Indy in on a call for nutrition. I think she would be a great one to talk with because I also have a ton of
Absolutely.
questions for her.
Yeah,
I can get you connected
absolutely.
with her, but that's a whole other just board to go down. So I think maybe we can take that to another conversation. As far as nutrition, just like the most basic thing, most kids are incredibly undersized. Like the amount of 12-year-olds that I've met this past year that weigh less than 120 pounds when they're anywhere from like 5'10". I have a 12-year-old that I'm working with right now that is 5'11" and maybe like 116. And right. And so one of our therapists goes through his movement screen, and mom's like, all right, what do we need to work on? He goes, listen, I went to school for a long time. So this is going to be very specific. And he points to his toes and then points to the top of his head because he needs to strengthen everything between these 2 points. And I go, listen, buddy, like here's what happens, right? When your body starts to grow and muscles get lengthened, something is going to get tight to make sure that things stay stable. And what's going on right now is that your joints and your ligaments are super tight because it's trying to catch up to the growth that just happened because they don't get the same blood flow, they don't get the same kind of love that your muscles do. So your body is trying to figure out how to work itself again. And what's happening is that there's some stiffness being developed because you're a little undersized and you've grown way too fast. Um, and so I told him, I was like, you need to get on the seafood diet. When you see food, you eat it. Like that's the
Yep.
nice part. And the best part was that because he's still like young and kind of gullible, he goes, oh, I love seafood. And I was like, no, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Seafood diet. Anything that has protein or carbs, you just continue to eat until you can't anymore. And that's going to be the
Yep.
best thing for you. Um, and going back to like working with young athletes, right? Like weight
Mhm.
can be bad conversations, not fun conversations. Putting a 13-year-old, 14-year-old on an in-body scale can sometimes ruin their mental. Um,
Mhm.
so you have to be able to create those relationships to have those conversations too. Like if I see a girl that's like dropping weight very fast and it looks like a red flag, like we have to make sure that you're staying healthy, right? And I want to make sure that you like we're not getting into body dysmorphia or any of those things. And I'm kind of glad that I kind of went down this rabbit hole because I feel like that's such a it's a bad spot that most young people are in right now, where they see people on Instagram, they see that dude that's shredded, or they see that girl that's twig skinny, and they're like, "This is what I got to look like."
Mhm.
She's standing on stage to show off her body. You're going onto a field to hopefully get a scholarship one day and be able to
Yep.
pay for school because of your performance. Like you guys have completely different goals. You have to understand. And I talked to one girl a couple weeks ago, and I said, "Listen, like, I don't want to make this a weird thing." I said, "I've noticed that you slimmed down a little bit. Is it a couple pounds or like, are we getting closer to 10? Because you don't really have much more weight to lose." And she goes, "No, like, since we've started ramping up like our running at school and practices and stuff like that, like, I'm a lot more active. Um, and I think that's what's going on." I said, "Okay, like, that makes me feel better. Let's increase your carbs just a little bit, just to make sure that we're not losing too much weight. And then you're going to feel like you have a little more energy throughout the day too." And she goes, "Okay, I can do that." Like it's very short, sweet. Just wanted to put a pin in it. And then if it gets any worse, then we can revisit that conversation. But I don't think it's like a body dysmorphia issue. I think it's like one, her metabolism is ramping up. She just turned 16 years old. Like there's things going on in the body, and she's so active that I think that's what's going on. So those conversations can sometimes be hard to address, or if you've created that relationship with a kid, it can be a lot easier. Um,
Mhm.
Talking weight loss with 16, 17-year-old girls is never fun, but that's
Right.
where the relationship aspect comes into place. Like you have to be able to think of relationships, and not to say that they're transactional, because I never want people to think that relationships are transactional, but the more that you withdraw into the relationship, the more that you can deposit when it's or my bad, the more that you deposit into the relationship,
Right.
the more that you can withdraw when you're ready to have those conversations. But they have to know
Right.
that you care about them in the same manner, that it's coming from a place of love and understanding and wanting to see them succeed.
Absolutely, and I love that we touched on that subject. I hate that we touched on it so late because I mean, that could be a whole episode in itself
Yeah.
of just building relationships and how having those conversations and things to look for and whatnot. Which all that means is that we're going to have you back on and have that episode and get your friend in as well and do a nutrition call and we'll both throw questions at her because you said that you have some.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah, she's a treat, and she's on the same page. She loves to talk too, so we can go in a few
Perfect.
rabbit holes with her.
Perfect. We'll get that set up. But I
Mhm,
do want to wrap this up by giving you an opportunity to
mhm.
tell people that want to continue this conversation with you, or maybe they even want to work with you, whether it be in person or virtually. How can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, easiest way is probably Instagram. My name on there is Coach Dodd.pxa for Pro X Athlete, or my business page on Facebook, which is Manx Strength. So MANX space strength, and Manx is all caps. On both of those, you should be able to find my contact information, whether it's email or just shooting me a message on Instagram. I'm pretty, I'm on social media more than I would like to be. I'm gonna be honest. I do a lot of meme scrolling. So if
Mhm.
you send me a message on there, I'm probably gonna get to it pretty quickly.
Perfect. And if for anyone that's watching on YouTube, those
Mm,
links are going to be posted underneath Scott. Anyone that's listening, they're going to be listed in the description and there will be hyperlinks. So hopefully you can just click on them.
perfect.
But Scott, I do want to thank you for taking this time for just to chat about stuff that we're both passionate about and how you're trying to help people. I really appreciate this time.
For sure. Yeah, anytime that I get an opportunity to talk and geek out on things that I love, like I'm never gonna pass it up. So I'm already looking forward to the next one.
Dude, I can't wait. Well, again, I want to say thank you and thank you to anyone that was listening to this and hope they got something out of it. Do you want to say bye to the people, Scott?
I'll see y'all later.
Thank you for listening to episode 5 of the Helpful Huddle podcast, where we interviewed Scott Dodd about what it means to be an athletic performance coach. Remember to give us a like and a follow on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter with the user handle at helpful_huddle and the YouTube channel at Helpful Huddle Podcast. You are also able to listen to us both on Spotify and Apple Podcast. The links are also found in the description below. Please reach out with your questions on topics that you would like to learn more about in the future.